So today we're going to be talking about knowledge operations, the methodology, platform, and team to use if you're using a knowledge operation strategy. So let's talk about a little bit about what that is. Uh, First, we're going to talk about operational knowledge and the unique challenges of transferring operational knowledge. So we want to define it and talk about why it's so hard to transfer. And then we're going to talk specifically about the methodology, tools, and teams you need to be able to transfer that knowledge efficiently. I like to start off with this. So, we're comparing knowledge ops to knowledge management. Now, knowledge management, a lot of times it's about how do I organize my content? How do I capture it? How do I make sure that it's all using the same template, that it's styled consistently? It's kind of like we're in this office removed from the world where we work in this environment that is, it's not reality. Knowledge ops is more like we're a first responder. We're on the ground. We have to help people. We have to find solutions to problems. So it's a little messier, but it's much more fulfilling because we're empowering people to work independently, to onboard faster, to really do amazing things. Sorry, I lost my clicker here. So let's first start by defining operational knowledge. Operational knowledge is the actual information an employee needs to be able to solve problems, complete tasks, and answer questions. So if we were to look at a regulated industry, regulatory knowledge is the same for all businesses in that industry. We can capture that online, right? And some rules, right? Then a business is going to have their general policy and process. So that's going to be specific to the business, but if you have similar businesses, their general policies and processes will be very similar. But operational knowledge, this is where the rubber meets the road because somebody reading the policy or the process won't necessarily know what to do. A subject matter expert has to take that and translate that policy or that process into actionable steps. It's right where the rubber hits the road. It's how do I answer this question? How do I, where do I click? What decisions do I make? It's much more tactical and very detailed, much more detailed than these other ones. So what you have to do then is uh, this operational knowledge. It has some unique things about it, really make it hard to capture. It's very complex. It's very detailed. It's totally unique to your business. So I can't take operational knowledge from one business and just plop it in another. The people might be different. The tools might be different. The rules might be different. And so this creates a situation also where this knowledge is constantly changing. So a knowledge ops strategy, we have to find a way to capture this complex, unique, changing information and a way to keep it up to date and deliver it. It has huge impact on a lot of things. So it's going to impact your onboarding. It's going to impact your consistency, your change management, supervisor bandwidth, because when people can't transfer operational knowledge efficiently, they just go to subject matter experts with questions. And it will impact if you're trying to adopt AI and you don't have this operational knowledge captured or a system for keeping it up to date, those AI initiatives aren't going to work because AI is only as good as the data you give it. So let's look at the current state of operational knowledge transfer. Typically, what we see is most of this is done through shadowing. You may have classes, you may have courses, training, all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, when you look at how the operational knowledge is transferred, it is primarily through shadowing. You follow someone who's more experienced than you or a subject matter expert. If you do try to document things, the subject matter expert will write down documentation. It gets filed in SharePoint somewhere. And the idea is like, oh, we've got this documentation. Things are going to be so much better. But when somebody needs it, they often can't find it. Or if they find it, they can't apply it. They can't follow it on their own. And so what do? They turn back to that subject matter expert or to a coworker. And so what we're trying to do with knowledge operations is not say, oh, we just want to create better documentation. We actually need to change this behavior. This behavior when somebody reaches out to a coworker or a supervisor instead of relying on guided knowledge. Because when they reach out to someone else, now the organization starts to rely on what we call tribal knowledge, and that's where we get all of our inconsistencies. That's why onboarding can be really difficult because if I don't know where to go for help, or I get different answers if I ask 3 different people, I can get 4 different answers to my question. So many of you may see in this before. This is the knowledge ops maturity model. What I've just described is an organization that's either in the tribal or the document stage. They may have documentation, but the behavior is such that people don't turn to that documentation when they're doing their job. The purpose of knowledge operations is to get the behaviors up to this guided stage where employees are relying on digital guides like a GPS to answer questions, solve problems, and perform tasks. This is the behavior that we need where we need to get people to go. So once again, this is a behavior we're changing. We want to replace this turning to a subject matter expert to turning to guided knowledge. To do that, we need a methodology and we need a platform and a team. So it's not a matter of I'm just going to take a piece of software and turn it on and it's going to magically do things for me. If I don't have the methodology, if I don't structure the team right, then no piece of software is going to solve this problem. Let's start first with the methodology. Now we have webinars that go in depth on this, but I'm going to give you a high level overview. Find and follow is a methodology for transferring operational knowledge. And the first thing it does is help you separate foundational and actionable knowledge. Actionable knowledge is what do I need to do? What do I need to say? It's the recipes. So we think of actionable knowledge, it's the recipe of what I need to do. Foundational knowledge is the background information, the who, the why, the what that I need to understand if I'm going to follow a recipe successfully. By separating this out, we accomplish a lot because we can just learn the foundational and then we practice finding and following the actionable. So we dramatically decrease the amount of information somebody needs to keep in their head to do their job successfully. We also make it much easier to keep content up to date because foundational information won't change as frequently. So we've separated that out. We're not going to have to change that as frequently. And when actionable information doesn't have all this foundational information mixed in, it's much clearer, it's much easier to understand when that needs to change and how it needs to change. So this part of that strategy really makes a difference. And then with all of our actionable information, we need to make it findable, followable, scannable. So this methodology gives us guidance on how to do that. And we've got a whole other webinar that John can link to where we just talk about how do you make your digital guides findable, followable, scannable. But this is the methodology, find and follow. We have a book on this you can get, free courses. That's the methodology you need to adopt for a knowledge operation strategy. Now let's talk about the platform and the tools you need to support this. So sometimes people say, well, it's a documentation platform or a knowledge base. Those have been around for a very long time and they have not been successful in changing those behaviors. And so a knowledge ops platform needs to do more than just be a database of information. It incorporates micro courses that are used to communicate that foundational knowledge that are then integrated with articles, checklists, and decision trees. Why do we need those things? Well, checklists can help us follow lengthy procedures, but make sure that we follow them correctly. And with our interactive checklists, you can expand out more detail if you're a less experienced employee. Decision trees help people handle complex situations without having to be an expert. It needs to include change notifications so that you know when a procedure has changed and you can acknowledge that. The guides need to be pushed into the workflow. So we do this by integrating with Slack and Teams and browser extension so that the guides are right where people are working. And then we need to have integrated tools for capturing that knowledge that can be AI or screen capture or video so that everything is going into one system, all of our operational knowledge. This system, like we said, needs to capture, empower, and maintain. So we need to capture the operational knowledge. We need to empower people to use it independently. And then we need to have a way of making sure that it stays up to date. So let's take a quick look here at these kind of traditional ways people capture information. First, you have Word and screen grab. And that's how a lot of documentation is created. Or maybe it's PowerPoint and a screen grab tool. It's very time consuming, difficult to make something that's really followable. And so people will spend hours creating these documents. I was talking with someone for a complex procedure. It would take them 12 to 16 hours to build this procedure. And at the end of the day, people weren't able to use it. It's because Word wasn't designed for that. That's not the purpose of the tool. You have video that you can record, and people record these hour-long trainings, but people don't go back and watch those things. They're very hard to apply. And it's hard to organize into a system where somebody can find and follow that information later on. And the other problem with video is it gets outdated very quickly. So if I create a really long video showing operational knowledge, like step-by-step guides, that can change on me. And now my video is out of date. It's hard to update. Then you have automated tools like Scribe or Tango, and these are really good at capturing straightforward or procedures, but they struggle to clarify complex procedures where a decision tree might be necessary. And it's also not easy to organize them all into a single place where this content can be maintained. So if we look at how a knowledge operations platform does this, is it brings this all into one place. We've got AI audio capture so that we can capture both foundational and actionable knowledge. That means your SMEs, your subject matter experts, they don't need to have to be experts at documenting. They can just um, they can just talk through the procedures and it will get captured for them in a way that is very easy for someone to follow. You've got integrated screenshot and video capabilities, rapid authoring tools, and all of this is coming into a single location so that people can find it, follow it, and update it. When we look now at empowering, we see 300 slide PowerPoint decks in there or massive Word and PDF files. These aren't empowering. They're not findable, followable, and scannable. And so when that happens, when we use these mediums that combine foundational and actionable knowledge, things get confusing. They're hard to follow, but also they're often outdated because they don't get used. People don't really use them to do their job. So in a knowledge jobs platform, we're going to have those interactive checklists, the decision trees, the micro courses. We're going to have those integrations to put it right where they're working so that they can be successful with that. And the guide that what we're supporting is an iterative process so that people can work independently. We have to get these guides to a place where people really can follow them on their own. Change notifications are a big thing. We see that people are pushing changes out through email, Slack, or Teams. The messages get lost. If you're on PTO, you come back, you never even see them. There's no real accountability as if somebody acknowledged a change or not. Um, in a knowledge jobs platform, you're going to be able to find these notifications. It connects you to the relevant guides, and it tracks your acknowledgement, so you know if somebody is aware of a change in a procedure or a new procedure. And then reporting, having analytics in there so that you know what people are using, what they're searching for. Things like SharePoint don't usually offer that up to you. And so you don't really have any sorts of accountability of, are people really following our guides? Have we really changed that behavior? Maintenance, this really gets to, um, you know, if the knowledge is getting used, it will get updated. And so once again, if we're changing this behavior, we've got to have those feedback loops. There's things like content certification where I can certify that content is up to date and have a schedule for reviewing it. All of this is important so that if people are going to change that behavior, that they're going to rely on these guides, they need to know that they can trust this content. So if you look at a typical organization now, this operational knowledge is kind of cobbled together amongst various systems. They might have an LMS where they have some courses. They might have, the SharePoint or shared drive with the job aids and training decks. All the change notifications are going to go out through email. And there's lots, Teams and Slack just becomes a tribal knowledge dumping ground where people ask questions and they answer them, and the answers are kind of lost in there in the threads. And so once again, this knowledge ops platform is going to bring this all together. So we have that single source of truth that we can maintain. And really it's supporting a workflow that supports a high level of what we call knowledge hygiene. And knowledge hygiene is confidence from all parties that the knowledge is accurate, useful, and usable by everyone there. Okay, now let's talk about the team. So how does the team need to change? When we look at traditional setup in larger organizations, they recognize a business need, and that will go out to the L&D team or the trainers. If you're a small organization, it might be just a supervisor that you're going to create this training material. And the ideal world that training enablement goes back to the team that they can use that. But what really happens is a bottleneck gets here. It takes so long to create all that content that it gets backed up and they don't really have the information they need. And many organizations, this team's so far removed from the front lines, they're not familiar of all the things that team will need. So the team creates all these stopgaps. Now, what are the stopgaps? Stopgaps are binders, sticky notes, their own SharePoint site. We've seen people that just create a PowerPoint deck and start putting things in there. They're creating all these things that are ad hoc because they don't have resources they can find and follow on their own. There's this great graphic of this is the Michigan State University. When they had these sidewalks here that they'd built. And if you look at the aerial photograph, these lines here are the actual paths people took. So they'd built these sidewalks, but people weren't using them. They were walking along this path, they're walking along that path to go there. And so the solution they had was they just paved those paths. So when they paved the paths, now people like let's just pave over the area where they're actually walking because they've shown us the paths that they want to take. Well, if we look at this from a team standpoint, you can think of traditional L&D as these paths that we've set up that we want people to take, but not the ones. These are the stopgaps. And so what we need to do is change the behavior of the people who are creating the stopgaps. How do we help them become what we call a knowledge investor instead of a knowledge spender? So if we rethink the team, we're going to take and have embedded knowledge champions and then a knowledge ops coach. So this embedded knowledge champion is that person who's creating the stopgaps. We've got with a knowledge ops platform, the tools are simple enough they can capture the information they need for their team and start empowering people instead of using these other strategies. The L&D team can function as a knowledge ops coach. So they are giving this champion guidance. They might help them in developing foundational courses and maybe optimizing some of their things, but they're empowering, helping that champion be on the front lines and capture and update the knowledge that they need. We find the further you remove the person creating and updating the content from the front lines, it's harder for them to be aware of what's actually needed there. And so you need to have someone that's close to what needs to happen. So then when you do that, you have your experts, your legal, HR, your team, everybody's contributing to a single source of truth. So we have centralized knowledge, but we have decentralized authoring. Now, how do you staff this? The knowledge champions already exist. They are the ones creating the stopgaps. They're creating the custom OneNote files, the PowerPoint decks. They're the ones trying to help other people or answering those questions. And these knowledge op coaches, they're often being tasked with creating training for information they're not familiar with. So if you train them up on the find and follow methodology, and then they can coach these knowledge champions, they're going to be much more fulfilled because they're going to have a real impact on the performance of people. All right, so I know that's been a whirlwind tour of what knowledge operations is. I want to leave plenty of time for questions that people might have, and I can talk about some anecdotal stories about knowledge operations. But if you want to dive into this more, you can learn more about the methodology, going to the Find and Follow course that we have, and obviously Find and Follow the book. If you come to, John will put in some links on our website. We have a lot of information around knowledge operations and how do you really adopt this new strategy going forward to transform the way you onboard people. Okay, so first question, how do you suggest we get buy-in from a director or CEO to consider this product as approach to a knowledge ops and management? First off, I never start with trying to sell them a product. So at the CEO or director, and I'm sorry, this new Mac OS update pops up these things about sharing my screen all the time. But they are not going to want to talk about a product because they know a product isn't going to solve the problem. What you want to do is start from a conversation from an approach. And what I have found to be the best way to start, and here I'm just going to kind of exit out here and jump back a couple of my slides. I have found having this discussion, where are we operating? What are the behaviors we have? And we have some videos on the knowledge ops maturity model. This is kind of a simplified version of it. I have an article on this. But if you start there with a CEO and director, this helps them see, oh, we're behaving in the wrong place. So once you have that realization and we accept that our knowledge is too complicated to memorize, then we're going to reframe this training problem to what we call a knowledge transfer problem. And that's when you can introduce the concept of find and follow. So when I've presented this to leaders, there's been times where they've decided to move forward a project, they've never even really seen the software. It's really just when they understand the problem in a new light and they understand the approach that they see, hey, this could work there. So that's my recommendation. Don't start with say, hey, we need this product. Focus on how are we going to stop operating on tribal knowledge? We need a new approach. Does that answer your question, Michelle, or do you have further questions?
And Greg, I have a bunch of questions for you as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm excited about this. I'm a leader. I'm excited about this. And I recognize I need a couple levers I need to pull. I need to change some behaviors. I need to rethink my tech stack or my tools. And I need to create a team. I come in Monday morning. What's the first thing I should do? Or what's the easiest first step I could do?
The easiest first step is to figure out what's going to be the initial project where do you want to do this? This isn't something where you come in and you boil the ocean, right? You say, where everybody's changing tomorrow to this. This is, and I'll tell you some projects where you can introduce this that are natural for this. So one can be, hey, we're rolling out a new ERP software, a new CRM. That's a perfect opportunity to experience some of find and follow. So you can determine that's a project. Or it can be, hey, we're hiring 20 new people this next year. We need a way to onboard them. So we need to build an onboarding program. Or so-and-so's, they left our team, they're on this other team now, but we still bug them like 20 times a day because we don't know what they're doing. We need to get that knowledge out of their head. So it's figuring out what's that pain point, that opportunity for a project. Once you've got that, then you can start, and I would like go through the find and follow book to start saying, okay, how are we going to approach this? Because then you can say the first thing of that is like, how do we get we'll do a find and follow workshop to analyze what's the foundational, the actionable. Once you understand that, and we can help you do that, we do that for people all the time, then you can present a clear case of what we're going to do, what we're going to improve. And you start from there, and then if you want to explore the software, we're happy to set up, obviously, demos and talk to you through that process.
Awesome. That's really helpful. And then it looked like Michelle chimed in with some great intel. She had the conversation about the maturity model and completed an audit that shows how tribal knowledge is at work, although she's still not getting buy-in. What should she do next?
So, Michelle, let me just ask a question here. Is it that the executive doesn't think that it's a problem, or he's not convinced that the solution would create the change needed?
Great question.
So it's been rare to me that an executive doesn't see the problem, but it might be. And so what you can do, sometimes what is helpful is to attach costs to it. So for example, depending upon where you're working, you can tie these um, to specific metrics. I was talking with an HR leader yesterday, and because people were working on from tribal knowledge, mistakes had been made that cost the organization in a couple of weeks like $300,000, and it was simply because they didn't have access to the knowledge they needed to answer things correctly. So if you can say like, what is this reliance on tribal knowledge? What is the problem that's really causing for us? What is that costing us, especially for executives? How does this translate into dollars for them? Now, if they're aware of the problem, they accept that, but they don't accept the solution. The next step is to say, okay, well, how could we um, prototype this in a way, like what would have to be true for you to believe that this would a solution would work? Something that we've found to be helpful is to take something that is very complex, that kind of one of the pain points, and work with our team. We'll actually put that into a guide for them and show it. And it's not so much the executives probably not following that procedure. What we've found to be effective is get somebody who's relatively new to the organization, and we'll get on a Zoom call with the executive, with yourself, and then someone that's new, and we'll have them go up and try and follow this procedure. And then the executive is able to see, and for with this new person, they'll talk through what, like, okay, either they can do it or they can't. And so you're taking a very kind of small case and doing a proof of concept, because the biggest risk in anything like this is, can we build content that people can follow on their own, and can we get people to change their behavior? And so you're trying to figure out, how do we de-risk this for the executive and help them believe that that can happen.
Awesome. Um, and we had a great question in here that says the differences between the book and the course, is it just the material being explained in two different ways? My thought there is the book goes into a little more detail. The course is kind of a primer for that. And the course, I think, complements the book really well to sort of visualize some of the different concepts.
Yeah, so the course is about 30 minutes long. So, it is kind of a high level introduction to the find and follow concepts. The book will have more case studies, more examples, and gets a bit more into the detail of things there.
Right. So, Greg, when you see teams moving forward with this, what are some of the biggest, this is maybe a two-part question, the biggest challenges you see, and then the biggest mistakes you see?
Well, they're kind of combined. So teams will have this conversation of what we're trying to achieve, and everybody's real excited. And then when we start the project, it's very easy to fall back into old habits. So we start writing documentation, and we're mixing in that foundational and actionable, or we're saying, oh, they need to know this, so I need to I need to show them how to do everything. A big part of find and follow is that we don't show people how to do things. We let them find and follow on their own, and they experience a bit of struggle there, but that struggle actually improves learning and improves independence. So the biggest mistake I see is people kind of buy into the concept, but then fall back to old habits. And so a lot of our coaching, we're kind of going back to, okay, let's go back to this. What's the principle we're trying to apply here? And once you do it, it's kind of it's a little nerve-wracking the first time, especially you do that first training. It's so different than what you've done before. But then people start getting it, and it's then you become a convert to the methodology there once you've done that. The other mistake I see sometimes is that, like I said, people try to boil the ocean. They're like, we're not going to launch until we have everything documented. We found, decide like you're going to launch something in 30 days. That better is better than perfect. So, that's what we want to do, is we want to improve things, because once you do that, once you get it launched and you start using it, you free up time to start backfilling things, and you learn so much. Um, in knowledge management, too often we've spent all this time preparing, getting feedback on things from the wrong people. We're never testing, can it really be used? When you launch it and let people use it, you're going to get instant feedback. This worked or this didn't. This was clear or it wasn't. And so the faster you can do that, the faster you're going to get to a place where things are really successful. So
All right,
here's a question.
Michelle.
Yeah, I'll read
Oh,
this
yeah.
here. What am I also saying is the question of metrics. If we starting from scratch and developing a knowledge culture that doesn't exist, what are some benchmarks you can suggest to see if the approach is effective? Well, you can think of what are the metrics you want to change. So it depends on what type of organization you're in. We've worked a lot with contact centers. The advantage of contact centers is they measure everything. So we've been able to measure that productivity has doubled. Time to proficiency has gone from, in some cases, it's decreased by 10 months there. So if you have, it really depends on what the problem you're trying to solve. Are you trying to onboard people faster? Are you trying to reduce errors? Or are you trying to reduce escalations to supervisors? If you're trying to reduce escalations to supervisors, then one of the things you can do is just start logging. How many times does a supervisor get asked a question during the day? Just start tracking that. And what questions are they? Give them a spreadsheet. Every time they get asked a question, just write it in that spreadsheet. It's just like a journal. And then using that, you can then go back and say, okay, well, these would be the questions we need to answer. And what would happen to everybody if those questions never had to be asked, if somebody could find and follow the answer on their own? And you can extrapolate out some metrics there. But if you want to look at your specific situation, I'd suggest, book some time with me. I'm happy to dive into the details because we've worked with a lot of organizations to help them build that business case to prove, what they're accomplishing there or what they want to accomplish.
Greg, I'm dropping your calendar for everybody to see in the chat if anybody wants to continue this conversation.
Now we're up at the half hour. I know. So Michelle, he wants to change how folks give him details without prompting. So yeah, you'll have to give me a little more detail on that. Because that sounds like maybe a communication thing. If like how people provide summaries, but we can happy to talk that book sometime and we can talk about it. And now we're up at the half hour. If people need to drop off, I totally understand, but I'm happy to stay and answer as many questions as you'd like. And maybe while people are going, I'll share with you a story of an organization that we worked with. They were very much a tribal knowledge organization. Things were very hard. It would take about 12 months for employees to onboard into this organization, really get to a place where they were proficient. There wasn't a lot of transparency in the processes. Their knowledge was very siloed. New hires is really a struggle. They'd have a decent amount of turnover in that organization. They really embraced this idea of knowledge operations and find and follow and really committed to it. They started out with just a few guides, but they said over the course of 6 months a year that the culture in the place completely changed. First, they saw people onboarding. It went from 12 months to between 8 to 10 weeks. And what was really exciting for them is each training class they had, the supervisors would say, this is the best class you've ever given us. And then the next class would come out. They'd say, this is the best class you've ever given us. Because when you're using a methodology like find and follow and you're using a knowledge ops platform, our training is consistent. And that means we can improve it as they go in. They said the mood in the organization totally changed. People had confidence. They used to kind of batch all the changes they wanted to roll out to every 6 months because they'd have to get everybody on a lunch and learn and train everybody. That's what you have to do when you're doing tribal knowledge. Now they were doing this. They just sent out a notification that it's changed. So they can push out changes, technology improvements whenever they want. And it was actually funny. They were going through a CRM implementation and one of the big four consulting firms had come in as part of this and was going to train them. And they just said, don't even bother. We don't want your PowerPoint deck. We're going to handle the training ourselves because we're going to do it. Find. We know what you're going to do is you're just going to show us a bunch of stuff. We want to do it, find and follow. So they just they really built this muscle in the organization that they could adapt to change really quickly. So when you talk to these businesses about what a change it's been for them, it's pretty eye-opening. All right. Well, unless there are any other questions, I think we'll wrap up today and hope that everybody has a great weekend. Anything else from your end, John?
No, I just dropped a link to your webinar next week. You're going to do a deep dive in the Knowledge Ops platform, which will be really exciting. I love when you do those. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope to see some familiar faces on there, or names, I suppose, there as well.
Me too. Thank you very much. Have a great day.